Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
This ecosystem that is being set up by the Meetup Groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Hello everyone, welcome to a special episode here of the Functional Forum. Super excited to be here, and thanks everyone for being part of the energy tonight. There we go, music out and we're in. Really excited to be here. We've got an epic show coming in here for you this evening. This is a continuation of our theme for 2021, which is reinventing medicine. And tonight we're going to be talking about systemic change. We're going to be talking about it clinically. We're going to be talking about it practically. You know, just 7 years ago was the very first episode of the Functional Forum. We had Dr. Kelly Brogan, who really brought the house down and brought the energy and really set the sort of energetic frequency for what we were about to do on the Functional Forum. Dr. Donnie Wilson, who was the naturopathic doctor of Mark Bertolini, who was the CEO of Aetna at that time. And my brother, Gabe Hoffman, who passed in 2019, but he and I created the forum. And we're super excited that, you know, 7 years later, it's given me the opportunity to go to all kinds of places. And you see some of it in the video there a minute ago. Look, we've been to 6 continents. We've had 2 guest hosts. We've been all over the US. We did a bus tour. We started companies. We've done all kinds of cool stuff. And it all started with one little meetup in the Helen Mills Theater in New York 7 years ago. So thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I guess, you know, what came at the beginning was the Meetup Groups. And if you're watching this in a Meetup Group, welcome. Got some really exciting stuff coming with the Meetup Groups down the road. One of the things that we introduced in 2016 was our Practice Accelerator. We heard from so many practitioners that they were just struggling to implement and get themselves from learning about functional medicine to actually doing it in practice. We saw that there was this opportunity to help practitioners build successful practices and break out of the medical system as it was and start their own vision. And so tonight, I'm super excited to have on the show live. We've got Dr. Andrea McSwain. Welcome, Doc. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
So yeah, tonight we are going to dip into the clinical. We're going to talk about the gut and healing the gut, and we've got an amazing case study from Dr. Vincent Pedre that came from last month. We're also going to talk about systemic change. But why don't we just start, you know, by Doctor just sharing a little bit of your journey. As of today, you run and manage and own 4 practices across Michigan that are all delivering functional medicine to patients every day. You've got a huge team, and I'd just love for you to share with our community here kind of how you got here.
So I think when we talked a little bit on Successfully Closed for the podcast, I kind of talked about how I didn't come into holistic medicine and functional medicine. I started with that mindset, working with my mother and her friends who were nurse healers with the hospice movement, and then luckily being blessed in Scottsdale, Arizona, to work and have Dr. Gladys McGarry become a mentor of mine, who is the American Holistic Medical Association. And she really embraced me into these wonderful monthly sessions where it was maybe a precursor even to the Meetup for Functional Forum, where it was a monthly discussion with people who were really looking for other people to team with them and fulfill their soul as other practitioners and feel part of a group. And so I joined that, and actually people like Andrew Wiles, initial director for the integrative medicine program, was part of that, and a shaman who was an integrative cardiologist. It was a really impressive group of people. And then I was actually originally an undergrad, a nursing student, but I just loathed the way that they ate their young. And I couldn't really fathom being in a place where I wasn't accepted as a person and what I cared about as a professional. It really mattered to me that I was learning and enjoying the investigative component of medicine. And unfortunately, that didn't work necessarily. Wasn't necessarily cohesive to just serving in a very like standard, do this, think about this is what you've got. So I left the nursing school at Arizona State and then went on to train in nonprofit management through the American Holistic Medical Association, which is all about philanthropy and the love of humanity, all the while gaining some management experience. And then eventually went to med school because Dr. McGarry's book, The Physician Within You, made me feel like I wanted that intimate relationship with people. And I wanted that power of service to them in some place where they were the most vulnerable and needed to be protected and trusted, and trust the people that were caring for them. And so I had that mindset, and I went to medical school and got kind of a quite an awakening when I went into obstetrics and gynecology, and really found that the focus there is maybe a little top down and wasn't really about the woman. And I just couldn't believe it, actually, because I was working to be a surgeon because I do love surgery, but I was looking to avoid it in all aspects, when necessary. I think surgery and drugs are necessary only when necessary, top of the pyramid. And so when I left that and started looking, I wanted to offer a lot of tools. I think not everything works for everyone, but I wanted to be able to provide as much as I could under one house and under one group, one team. And so I just started gathering opportunities to do that. I started with manipulation as an osteopath, and then, started looking at more than structural integrity, but elimination and biotransformation and all the matrix components. And then at that point, really went through the functional medicine training and Practice Accelerator, which the Practice Accelerator, I have to say, is kind of a sleeper hit because it takes time to get in, change the mindset, and really say that this is about showing people what I have to offer. And I think a lot of practitioners struggle with that because they really think I'm marketing myself or I'm selling myself, or it's like, no, you're just telling people that you're there. And so I got on Facebook and I did my Facebook every week, and I made these really very, not wonderful videos, but I did it, and I did an autoresponder, and all the while I'm just, really having incredible, growth, not incremental growth, exponential growth.
Yeah.
And it's because I was present to the community and they needed this care that I wanted to offer. So we need each other. And that's what I tell my patients, like, I need you and you need me, and we're in it together. And so by marketing myself was really just saying, like, I'm here and I'm for you, and tell me what you've got going on. And patients came with complicated things, and I would read and research and ask them 1,000 questions, and they needed something, so I'd add another service. They need something else, so I add another service, and then it just, so.
It's been an amazing journey. Yeah, I'd love to just dive into two parts of it. First, as a clinician, I know one of the things that we talk about the other day, and by the way, we have a whole conversation that Dr. McSwain and I had that's coming out on the podcast next week. We're only going to be able to do a little bit of it here today. But one of the things you said on the podcast was your journey from being like a clinician to being like a team leader of clinicians, and what it takes to sort of like sort of bestow trust on another clinician.
Right. And so, it was, I can just, I guess, paraphrase that, but basically, we have to create a lineage, and it's not just that we exist as practitioners. We have to provide an ability to serve the entire community. And that has to happen outside of my 15 hours of clinic. So I have to bring people in to support and build a team. And that's just what I kept doing, and including other doctors. In fact, we have really looked at an opportunity for excellence. So it's not just that we're here, we're actually offering excellent care with all of our practitioners, so that when people come, they have an expectation of that this is going to be a wonderful experience for them, and that they're going to have a team. That's really what people need. They do. They need many facets, many contributors to help them have a different vantage point. So that's what we offer. And it is a big transition from just being a clinician, not just, I don't mean to say that, but being a clinician and being a CEO of an organization.
Yeah, something you shared the other day was that you have different roles on different days of the week. Can you just speak to your journey as far as like becoming an entrepreneur?
So, at first, I mean, quite honestly, I was counting my blueberries of what we were eating. I mean, we didn't have a lot to start the clinic. And I knew that if I had to be in 2 different locations, because then I could build my base a lot faster. And so Grand Rapids is an hour away. I work with KPS Essentials, which is a skincare line that's incredible. And they said, come use our space. And I said, thank you. So I had some free rent. And it's kind of in a warehouse, but they have a beautiful treatment room. So I said, sure. And she brought in some friends or patients, a few, and then it started growing in Lansing at the same time. And then I had an opportunity to connect with another clinician who was a naturopathic physician in Michigan. And so we just started bringing that in. All the while I'm adding infusions to my office in Lansing, and then the Grand Rapids office, and then of course, taking over in TC and Frankfurt so that we could start just implementing all of those things that already existed in Lansing, Grand Rapids.
It's an amazing story. So we're going to come through different parts of it throughout the evening. Tonight, the first show that we did this on the Reinventing in Medicine last month was all about the gut. And Dr. Vincent Pedre shared with us like his kind of thesis and, so his overview. So what I want to do now is I want to just on the clinical side, just share his presentation, and we'll share it here for a minute. It's about 5 minutes long, 10 minutes long, and then come back to you just to share about, how you found this kind of care. And then, we'll move through. So I'm going to pull up this and we'll pull this session. Here's the Michigan Center for Holistic Medicine, which is the name of these centers along here. So here we go. We'll start with the gut and we'll see where we go. Here's Dr. Vincent Pedre.
Hey everyone, Dr. Vincent Pedre here. I'm going to follow up with a SIBO case study that I want to present to you that goes along with the SIBO presentation. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And so this is a 41-year-old female who presented to my office a couple of years ago with an inability to lose weight. She was status post of radioactive thyroid ablation in 2013 for hyperactive thyroid graves. And she actually was coming in with normal thyroid function tests. She was followed by an endocrinologist, and yet she still had severe fatigue and she had a really hard time getting out of bed in the morning. Other symptoms she had were water retention, severe bloating, and she was mostly constipated with occasional diarrhea. When I dug in and asked her a little more about her fatigue and how it tracked throughout the day, she actually admitted that she got a second wind around 6:30 or 7 p.m. Her energy would improve. And the problem was then she couldn't get to bed until 1 or 2 in the morning. Then she wouldn't wake up until 9:30 the next morning feeling groggy. I had her do a medical symptoms questionnaire and she scored a 58, which is kind of like moderate severity. When I asked her about her diet, she was vegetarian now for the last like 1 to 2 years, but prior to that, she had eaten some chicken and turkey. And she was trying to avoid wheat and gluten, but she wasn't being really strict about it. And she would cheat with the occasional pasta dish. For caffeine, she had a cup of coffee in the morning with a splash of whole milk. She would make a vegetarian or vegan protein shake, and she would drink it on the way to work. Then she would skip lunch because she simply just felt too bloated from the morning shake, and she would maybe just have a green juice sometime during the day. Get home at night starving and have quinoa or brown rice bowl with stir-fried vegetables and coconut oil. And she really wasn't drinking a lot of alcohol. Now, when I asked her a little bit more about her history, she had been diagnosed with SIBO 3 years prior, and she had been treated with rifaximin. And she only had transient improvement with a return of symptoms. And it was characterized by severe bloating that made her feel so sick that she just didn't have an appetite. She didn't want to eat. And she was overtraining because her primary motivation was to lose weight at all costs. So she would force herself to go to the gym and work out with ferocity. She had a personal trainer 3 to 4 times per week, and she was doing cardio on her days off. There was no rest for her. And I went into her social history, and her work was this really high stress job that she just didn't like. However, she was so well paid that it afforded her husband and her the lifestyle that they wanted. So it was hard to leave, even though if I asked her, what do you really want? She didn't want to be in that job because it was a constant source of anxiety for her, on top of just all the frustration she was feeling from being chronically ill. And when I asked her, what is your passion? Her passion was dancing, but because she felt so tired, which is kind of like oxymoronic because she was still going to work out, but she just wouldn't go to dance class anymore. And she was starting to feel like she was dying inside, irritable, angry, short-tempered, frustrated. She was married with no children, wanted to get pregnant, had not been able to get pregnant. And all of this stress was also putting a strain on her marriage. So during the first office visit, I did an exam, and she looked kind of puffy in appearance, and she was restless, moving her legs, kind of fidgety the whole time. 5'4", 143 pounds. That gave us a BMI of 24.5, which is on the higher end of the normal scale. But for her, her comfortable weight was 120 to 125 pounds. And on exam, the significant findings were dark circles under her eyes, thin white coating on the tongue, hyperreflexia, leukoplakia in 3 fingernails, and tympany on abdominal exam. So the goals of treatment on the first visit were, first, to create a more consistent meal schedule, because she really wasn't eating her meals at a consistent time every day, reduce stress, and work on sleep hygiene. I also wanted to educate her on kind of some of the underlying pathology that goes with SIBO, like leaky gut. So I gave her the Pillars of GI Health patient handbook and instructed her on which pages to read. We also worked on her diet, and turns out she was eating a lot of refined carbs. So we worked on a low sugar diet, low on refined carbs, and a SIBO specific diet plan. I also wanted to address mindfulness by having her slow down to eat, practice more intentional, intuitive eating. And she was such an adrenaline junkie, and we needed to get her out of that fight or flight response that her body was in and get her more into the parasympathetic. So I encouraged her to do restorative yoga once a week and add meditation using one of the meditation apps like Headspace, at least once daily if possible, even if it's just 5 to 10 minutes. We also instituted some sleep hygiene, getting her to bed by 10:30 to 11 p.m. at night, waking up earlier, 7 to 8 a.m., using blue light blockers at night, and shutting down electronics at least 1 hour before bedtime. And at the end of the visit, I gave her some take-home test kits to do, SIBO breath test kit and a saliva cortisol collection kit. So she did the SIBO breath test, and she came back. This was her second office visit. And we see here that if you look at the yellow line, at 120 minutes, there was a peak hydrogen of 114 parts per million. And her baseline methane actually started at greater than 3 parts per million, which is part of the definition of SIBO, or a rise in hydrogen of greater than 20 parts per million from baseline. And she certainly met it by all criteria. So at the time, I treated her in 2 parts. I put her again on rifaximin because she had not been on it for a while, and added to the regimen slippery elm bark, which is a prebiotic, but also helps to shuttle the rifaximin into the bacteria that are overgrowing. And we did that for 2 weeks. And we followed this with an antimicrobial regimen that included herbs like berberine, oregano oil, and also antifungal regimen, because what I found when treating SIBO is that oftentimes there is underlying SIFO, or small intestinal fungal overgrowth. And if there isn't, rifaximin, I've seen it over and over cause a fungal overgrowth. So I usually follow the treatment with antifungal herbs, and even sometimes I might throw in nystatin at the same time as the treatment. I also address some of the underlying issues with her digestive system by adding in digestive enzymes. She had signs and symptoms of low stomach acid production, so betaine HCl with protein meals, serrapeptase for biofilm, and then D-limonene to stimulate peristalsis, because it was obvious that she was suffering from low poor intestinal motility as well. So she came back the third office visit, and at that point she had completed the treatment. She was starting to feel better, and we added in a spore-based probiotic. We also added in serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins at the same time to account for any die-off that may happen, as well as a leaky gut formula with L-glutamine while continuing the previous supplement support, and also reinforcing the mindfulness and the sleep hygiene, because she was kind of doing some of it, but she was letting things get in the way of self-care. So it's always important, you know, with patients that you're continuously reinforcing the plan, even past parts of the plan that you already discussed, because and ask them, check in with the patient and ask, you know, how well were you able to do this? Was it overwhelming? What things were you able to do, and what couldn't you do? And if you couldn't do it, then how can I help you? How can we work this out so that you can incorporate more of these self-care practices? So then on her fourth office visit, 1 month later, she was status post-treatment, and we decided to continue the spore-based probiotic as well as the serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins for another month, along with the leaky gut formula, and just kind of like reinforcing a lot of the work that we were doing. She was continuing to get better. Her energy was improving. And we wanted to make sure to address other concerns along with the fatigue, her cortisol, and she really wanted to get pregnant. So, and I had explained to her how important it was to get her gut issues under control before really exploring the infertility angle. And of course, making sure that her thyroid hormones were balanced. And that's how we got this patient through this treatment process. And it's a really great example of how you would approach a patient with SIBO. So that's my case. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and thank you everyone for allowing me to present this challenging case to you. And I want to just leave you with this thought that whenever you have a SIBO patient, that it's not just about the regimen, it's not just about treating the SIBO, but often you have to treat the patient that has the SIBO. And time again, what I've seen is SIBO can happen in patients that are type A. They have high stress jobs, and they're trying to do too much. They're rushing through their meals. They're not giving time to get into that parasympathetic relaxed state. So it's really important as you get through the SIBO treatment that you're also addressing the mind-gut connection and the importance of mindfulness, meditation, restorative practices, because you have to change the internal workings that allowed for SIBO to happen in that person so it doesn't come back. So I wanted to leave you with that thought and hope this case presentation was helpful for you. Thank you.
Do you have people like that in Michigan, or is that a purely New York patient case that we just saw?
We do have people in Michigan like that. Yes, for
What
sure.
do you think about what you just heard there? Would you say that I know that you have a whole team, but are you thinking in a similar way to Dr. Pedre about healing the gut there?
Very similar. Mm-hmm. So what I say to people is you have a party in the colon and the small intestine's a library, and you don't want the party to go into the library. And then I say that the appendix is a bouncer. And so oftentimes when the immune system has been overwhelmed in the gut, the appendix will get fatigued. And so that's why the bouncer either gets overwhelmed by a lot of bacteria that's coming from the party, or the bouncer is having another problem that's an immune suppression problem. So I try to explain to people that we just want the party to stay in the colon and go out, and we don't want the party to come into the small intestine in the library. So that's just a little way that I've found to help people understand SIBO.
What are some of the ways that you found to facilitate the education that's necessary for most people to learn about their physiology enough to really participate in that way?
So how do I help people develop a body awareness or a mindfulness around how their body actually functions?
Yeah, I think, to me, there's kind of if you go to a regular doctor, there's no need to know, because it's just here's the magic pill, You take the magic pill, the symptoms go away. But if you want to get patients to participate, they have to kind of know what's going on. And what ways have you found to like educate patients at that kind of go beyond, I guess, you just sitting next to them?
Sure. So when I first meet someone, I say, what do you want your life to be like in 6 months? What do you want to be doing? And I don't go from the negative answer, I go from the positive answer. So I want to be able to run around with my kids. I want to be pregnant. I want this. And I say, okay, and then I say, okay, let's make that happen. Or, let's break that down. And they say, what do you want out of this visit? What if you left this visit, what would you want to know? Or where would you want to be? And I say other things like, I'm really intense. I want to get this going. I want to get better really fast. And that's what we're going to do. So it gets them engaged with the idea that they can change. And it also puts in the fact that they're not looking at what's not working, but what is working. And so they're saying, oh, when I eat this, I feel good. And that's a lot better idea in my mind than them saying, like, when I eat this, I feel bad. So it's actually helping them understand to build on success and say, oh, this is better, or I'm feeling better, I have more energy. And then say, okay, how did you make that happen? Let's do that some more. And so it really turns the tables on like a negative symptomatology perspective and more about being in control of their body and making things happen that will make them feel better.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's such a great point. What does your team look like now? If I come for a new appointment at a clinic where you aren't, what does that look like? As far as like who does the first appointment and what does the rest of the team look like? If it comes up that I need some sort of osteopathic manipulation, or if I need some, as part of the intake, who's doing that? Like, how have you, because one of the things about the great functional medicine doctors I find is just that they learn so much over a whole career that it almost takes like 6 practitioners to replace them in a certain way, because they have the detox, they have the behavior change,
Sure.
They have the, manipulation. What does it look like if you show up at one of these clinics where you aren't every day?
Well, so I'll take you to the phone call. We do a discovery call, and our health coach leads a 15-minute free discovery call. So she can tell the person based on what's going on with them. 1, if they aren't a good fit for our clinic, which most of the time people are a good fit. And then 2, she knows the clinicians. And so she knows what interests them a little bit more, or maybe more of a fit based on the personality and mindset of the person who's calling. So then when people come in for maybe a metabolic dysfunction issue, they will speak with any of the clinicians on a 1.5 to 2 hour initial. And then at that time, we offer a package so that people can receive an infusion for half off. And that's either usually an immune booster, that's like 5,000 of vitamin C, lysine and glutathione, or ozone as an initial. And that's half off to introduce them to infusions. And at that point, for me, oftentimes I will introduce manipulation as a facet of the treatment plan. I often won't provide them with like a large amount of supplement. I don't do a lot of supplements. I do like, maybe I'll have someone on up to 7 or 8 if something's like actively being worked on, but maybe even 10, but I'm not going to dump them with 20 supplements on the first day, because I want them to see that we're actually working through a problem. And so we have to get to know each other and know what's going on. If someone is in our cancer care support program, they actually will go into an hour-long webinar with one of our naturopathic physicians, who is the administrative physician over our cancer care support program. They'll do a 2-hour initial with that doctor, and then they'll see me for an hour along with her, and then I'll implement some of the physical medicine. She's also a naturopath. At any one of our locations, they can receive physical medicine support in our cancer care support program, infusions, and then if we choose to do some specific testing, or if the patient wants that. So we are funneling our patients right away into what they need and what's the best practitioner for them. And then, of course, we have a team system. So if I think they need to see the naturopathic physician for homeopathy or Chinese medicine, or the craniosacral specialist, which I do definitely craniosacral work, but there's some times based on location that I'll recommend the craniosacral therapist that's in another office. Or if we have someone that just really, I think that's the most thing. If they come to me, they can be I'm part of their team always, because I'm the medical director. So I review all the charts with the other physicians. And then also I will do just specific manipulation as part of the team. Does that,
Amazing.
so you
Yeah.
come in and have a really good time, actually, because we always say we're cheating because people come in and laugh and smile. And I'm like, humor is the best medicine. And if I can get you to laugh, then I'm already cheating and you're feeling better. So we really make people feel really comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a key part. And I would say, as someone who's walked into like thousands of these kind of practices, you could always kind of tell the energy of the clinic and how well people were doing clinically by just the energy of the people around there. So I think that's a huge part of the care. All right, so we talked about gut, and obviously we talked about the reinvention of medicine, and we need to get the gut healthy because that's such a critical part. But why is it such a critical part? I'm excited to share a presentation here now from Dr. Patty Devis, who is the Chief Clinical Officer at Genova Diagnostics. And Genova has been a leader in the functional lab testing space here for a few decades. So this is, now we're talking about systemic change. Let's hear from Dr. Patricia Devers. So a warm welcome to the forum, Dr. Patty Devers. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, James. Good to see you again.
So I'm really excited to chat today. Just like, last month in this reinvention of medicine, we talked about the gut, and Dr. Pedre really shared his protocol for fixing gut issues, how to use, drugs and nutrition and all those things together. And we want to sort of expand out a little bit. But I guess before we get into sort of like the clinical side, I know you're now the Chief Clinical Officer at Genova Diagnostics. What's the journey for just a regular doc to end up in your role?
It's a crazy journey, to be honest, James. I was the doctor from your book, Evolution in Medicine. I was conventionally trained. I worked in a hospital in an emergency room for 18 years. I was burned out. I was sicker than the patients that I was seeing because of it. And so I read your book and found myself in it. And to be clear, I walked away and ended up in Asheville, had no idea what functional medicine was. I literally walked by, saw a sign that said Genova and Googled it and looked it up. And I landed here in this sea of naturopaths who helped reignite my love for medicine, my passion for medicine. So I started here just as a medical education specialist, voraciously trying to absorb anything functional medicine I could. Slowly sort of worked my way up, became passionate about functional medicine, learning everything I can in the literature, and sort of worked my way up and kind of really fell in love with Genova and kind of really just jumped into this entire field of functional medicine.
Amazing. Well, look, what I really love today is, we're talking about the reinvention of medicine. We start in the gut, and ultimately we started with understanding that this reinvention of medicine has to start in the gut. But ultimately, we want to go a little bit beyond digestive issues. So why don't we take a few moments and sort of go somewhere, and then we'll come back and talk about what we learned.
I could talk about the microbiome and systemic health for hours, but in the constraints of the functional forum, what I thought I'd do is just pick a couple of areas that have a lot of research and that we find exciting. I mean, here at Genova, we've been doing this for 30 years. And so this is something that's very near and dear to our hearts here, not only at Genova, but in functional medicine in general. So let's just kind of talk about some of the bigger topics that you might see and hear about. And I think Hippocrates said it best: all things start in the gut. And he said this long ago. And in functional medicine, it's become one of the tenets of what we do. We're always looking for that root cause of disease. And oftentimes we look to the gut. And we know that the naturopathic community has really taken this full steam ahead. But here we are, 2,400 years later, and it looks like he was onto something, because the field of this, with the advent of the Human Microbiome Project in the early 2000s, though we're still in our infancy as it relates to understanding the entire dynamic and the importance of the microbiome, it's really evolving and it's really exciting. Like I said, we love this here at Genova because we've been doing this, like we say, before the microbiome was cool, before it ended up on Time magazine. So this is something that's really important to us. And so what I thought is, let's just hit a couple of the big topics of how we know the microbiome is affecting your systemic health. And I think when people talk about systemic health as it relates to the microbiome, the one thing that always keeps coming up, because it's been well studied, is something called the gut-brain axis. And so we know that there is this bidirectional communication between what happens in our GI tract and what happens in our brain. And we think about the microbiome in our GI tract and those bacteria that live there. We know that there's some signaling that occurs from the bacteria in our gut to our brain via the vagal nerve. We also know that some of the metabolites of these bacteria, things like short chain fatty acids, namely acetate, propionate, and butyrate, these can also in systemic circulation directly affect the brain. What most people forget is that a lot of our neurotransmitters are also made in the gut, things like serotonin, which are made in the enterochromaffin cells of our GI tract. And so we think about how important the GI tract is to signal the brain, but conversely, the brain can also send signals down to our digestive tract. And so we think, okay, we know that, let's just take, for example, stress. In times of stress, real or perceived, your body will release something called corticotropin releasing hormone, which has been shown to directly signal to the epithelial lining of your GI tract and has been implicated in causing things like increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut. It can also affect the mucin production, the lining of your GI tract. And things like stress itself can actually alter the motility of our GI tract. So we see that there is this bidirectional axis that happens. And so if we know that there is this ongoing communication between our gut and our brain, it should come to no surprise then that probiotics and interventions with probiotics and other supplements are being studied in diseases like Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, epilepsy, and even mood disorders. So to think that dietary changes, probiotics are things that might actually make a difference in some of these neurologic diseases is fascinating. Another place that we think about, the microbiome playing a significant role is something around metabolic dysfunction. And in this time when we're in this pandemic where we know that the patients whose outcomes aren't great, or the patients who are most susceptible, are those with things like metabolic dysfunction. And so if we look at this graphic, we know that our dietary choices can actually affect intestinal dysbiosis. We know that fiber in our diet gets fermented by the commensal bacteria to make various metabolites, again, short chain fatty acids. Different dietary choices.
It's like this, Patty, just to throw into that, it seems like with COVID particularly, you've got two things going on. You've got, unhealthy choices being exacerbated now by the COVID infection.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go back to that last slide, you could even think that, you've got a situation where the stress and fear affects the gut permeability and therefore, directly affects your outcomes with COVID too, right?
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And then not only are you, affecting the microbiome, but then what the microbiome does from there is even more intriguing, because if we look at this and we make unhealthy choices and we get these dysbiotic patterns, what results are aberrant metabolites and these aberrant metabolite concentrations, and these abnormalities can disrupt GLP-2 mediated tight junction integrity of the barrier of the epithelial here. And so this loss of integrity makes the gut epithelium more permissive, if you will, to microbial metabolites, things that the bacteria make, such as lipopolysaccharides or LPS, or trimethylamines, TMA. And when these metabolites enter your circulation, they can go to things like the liver or the adipose tissue, and it further causes further inflammation that's associated with a lot of diseases. So for example, if TMA, it goes to the liver and becomes TMAO, which then becomes a cardiovascular risk factor. We think about some of the other things, as we said, LPS, that can go to adipocytes, and you get obesity, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and it's by way of things like increasing free fatty acids, increasing triglycerides, and dyslipidemia. And to your point, when you put this together with the fact that the stress of the pandemic paired with unhealthy choices can really set you up for some of these things that would make you more susceptible to even complications of COVID or any type of infection, it's intriguing, and it becomes vitally important in this time. And if I can take this one step further, that interruption of the gut barrier integrity can upregulate the gut immune system. And so when you have gaps between the cells and the epithelium, LPS, that lipopolysaccharide, can alter toll-like receptors and NFKB, or nuclear factor kappa beta activation, and endotoxin tolerance, leading to things like autoimmune conditions such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, celiac disease, and others. And so again, it's also interconnected, that it becomes vitally important, especially in this time. So let's talk about skin. This is one that, some people skirt around this, but what's interesting is some of the newest research around something that they're calling the gut-skin axis, which is interesting. And we know that the skin itself has its own microbiome. We know the skin has bacteria, and it kind of keeps its own homeostasis and allostasis. But what's found now is that the microbiome of our GI tract actually can communicate with the skin microbiome, and it's found to be affecting some of the skin cell differentiation as well as keratinization of your skin. And when there's an alteration in that communication between the two, it leads to diseases like psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, acne. And in fact, they're finding that if you can biopsy some of these psoriatic lesions, they're finding LPS, that bacterial metabolite, in some of these plaques, which is interesting. And there's also some studies that are showing that if you supplement a patient with a probiotic that contains something called Lactobacillus paracasei, it actually improves skin barrier function, and it decreases skin inflammation by way of altering mast cell degranulation, decreasing vasodilation and edema, and altering TNF-alpha. So just by the addition of a probiotic can make some significant systemic changes, even in your skin, and to alter the course of some of these disease processes, which is really intriguing. So let's talk immune system. I mean, let's be honest, we're in the midst of a pandemic. People are hyper-focused on this. Patients are hyper-focused on wanting to optimize them. Clinicians are really focused on this. And in the midst of this, when you're trying to really optimize your immune system, what better time to check in with your gut? And the reason for this is that upwards of 75% of our immune system resides in our gut. And people don't often recognize that we have tissue and we have various cells in our GI tract, something called GALT, which is gut-associated lymphoid tissue. The lining of the mucosal lining of our intestines secretes something called fecal secretory IgA, and this is a class of antibodies that's secreted. It's kind of like the first line of defense right in your GI tract. And if you look at this graphic, one of the submucosal layers is called the lamina propria. And in the lamina propria, you'll see that there are lymphoid cells, there are myeloid cells, which can communicate both with each other through cytokine production, but there's also cell contact, which helps to regulate our innate and adaptive immunity. And so we know that the commensal bacteria and the intestinal epithelial cells can also directly modulate the immune cell responses by producing inflammatory mediators. But additionally, what we're also seeing is that there are some commensal bacteria, or some of their metabolites, again, short chain fatty acids, for example, that can both enhance and repress host immunity by inducing T helper cells or Treg cells, for example. So again, no better time to check in with your gut when you're trying to optimize your immunity. But if we can now see that commensal bacterial communities can modulate your immune cell homeostasis and disease by either providing immunoregulatory or pro-inflammatory signals, and we know that there are studies to suggest that the microbiome can mediate an over and underactive response. Could it be that personalized nutritional strategies can help as prophylaxis and as supplementation and adjunct to current treatments that we're looking at as it relates to things like COVID? So again,
yes, it can be.
Right? Isn't that exciting? And so let's take a look at this directly and we'll say, okay, well, how does this relate to the COVID-19 pandemic? And it's intriguing. So we know that COVID-19 is caused by this SARS-CoV-2. And SARS-CoV-2 primarily causes lung infection because it binds in your lungs to something called ACE2 receptors in the alveolar epithelium. ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors right in the lining of your alveoli in your lung. But what's interesting is that the intestinal epithelium, say your small intestine enterocytes, also express that same receptor, the ACE2. So we know that for years, the role of the gut microbiome and how it influences lung disease, it has been studied. And in fact, they've been studying it as it relates to respiratory viral infections as a way to, does the lung then alterate the gut microbiome? However, a lot of those studies were in things like flu, influenza, or cytomegalovirus. But what's in the past year and a half, what they're trying to study now is they're trying to understand the role of the microbiome as it relates to COVID-19 specifically. And we know from some of those studies that the gut microbiome diversity and the presence of beneficial microorganisms might play an important role in determining the course of this disease. And so the way the studies are going now is in things like, we want to know what's the microbiome's role in areas like herd immunity. And these are all from the past year and a half. And what's the role in how we respond to vaccines? And it's going to be vital as we move into the future over the next 2 years to really understand the important and vital role of the microbiome as it relates to this infection. Admittedly, some of these studies are just merely animal studies, and again, using influenza and other viral illnesses, but it suggests a potential role in determining optimal response in humans. And to bring it back to what you said, James, if you put all of this together, let's say you take this whole picture together, and you're right, people are in a pandemic, they're in lockdown, they're making unhealthy dietary choices. Those unhealthy dietary choices can then further lead to metabolic dysfunction. That metabolic dysfunction is then setting you up to be more susceptible to things like this viral infection. And then to note that a healthy microbiome might be something that you can really, alter to try to prevent or to suppress some of the sequelae thereof. So it's all just very exciting. And here at Genova, like I said, this is near and dear to our hearts. We've been studying the microbiome. We find this research fascinating, and we're going to continue to ring that bell.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love it. Well, let me just run something by you, because ultimately, we're in this conversation about, what will it take to reinvent medicine? And I think one of the things that, you're obviously in a position where you work for one of the lab companies that has been sort of at the center of the first, functional medicine 1.0, which I think is very like lab and supplement heavy, because that's what people are looking for.
That's right.
One of the things I wanted just to contextualize is that, if you look at some of the emerging models like the Cleveland Clinic, it's like, do you really need a Genova test to get the signal, hey, you should optimize your microbiome, right? Because ultimately, that's going to help a certain large percentage of the population, right? Prevent and reverse many conditions. It seems to me that there's a primary layer of sort of lifestyle intervention that can happen like across the board with way less cost. And then ultimately we can start to use these kind of tools for those patients where there's still some underlying inflammation, there's still some risk factors. We haven't quite got to the root cause of what's going on. And I just love for you to chat about that, because I'm all about access, and I'm all about trying to, if this reinvention is to fulfill its potential, it has to be accessible.
Well, I think you're 1,000% right. And, we've been here for 30 years. We've been doing this for a very long time. And to your point, I think last year, your functional forum had the theme of resiliency, which was very prophetic and a little bit creepy, James. I'm not quite sure how you knew to choose that word. And so we think about what happened in the last year, right? So everyone had to be resilient. We had to pivot. We had to think of new ways. How can we go to telemedicine? How can we reach more people? And I think with Genova, we did our best to kind of pivot and be resilient, to get people to streamline our online ordering process, to drop ship kits to patients' home, and to be a little bit more flexible. But in this reinvention phase, as you're describing, I think there's a couple of things we can do. And I think one of them is in messaging and teaching. And I know as far as Genova is concerned, one of the ways we've been trying to reinvent is exactly what you're saying, James, where if you go on any of our social media platforms every day, someone from the medical education team is on there doing a live stream. We do clinical pearls. We talk about nutrients. We talk about exercise and movement. We're trying to get the message out, not only to clinicians, but to patients. We're trying to educate on the healthier lifestyle things. So social media has been a big presence for us, mainly for that reason in this time of COVID, to get this information out to as many people as possible. The other way we're doing this is with our podcast called The Lab Report, co-hosted by me and the inimitable Dr. Michael Chapman. And we did have Mr. James Maskell on there as well. And our reason for really pushing this podcast is exactly what you're describing, because in your book, Community Cure, you talked about ways to get this message out in a way that would reach everyone, right? And you talked about group consults and how do we make this a community? And so we do consults every day. We teach this stuff to clinicians every day. We thought, well, what if there's a way we could put this out in a podcast? Everything we know about movement, diet, nutrition, lifestyle, what do your tests mean? So we're using the podcast to kind of ring that bell. And anyone who's new to functional medicine, whenever I speak to a clinician, I often send them to the podcast. And I specifically send them to your interview, which was one of my favorites. And apologies to all of our other guests. But in that podcast, I had never heard anyone lay out the case for functional medicine the way that you did, and lay out the future of functional medicine on the back end of a pandemic as the true North Star, the way of the future. And so I often send people there just to kind of hear that and to inspire clinicians. And again, the podcast and our social media videos, this is a way for us to get to patients and teach them there's a different way. There's a new way. To clinicians who are burned out, there's a new way. We need to reinvent how we're getting that message out. And I think that's where we're focusing our efforts. And to your point, not everyone can afford to get a test. Not everyone can afford a functional medicine doctor. But if they hear little bite-sized bits of there's a better way, I think that's a way that we can reinvent in this space.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, look, I'm really excited about the potential of, everyone in this space, working together for the Reinvention. I think you guys play an important role in the ecosystem and the community, and, just appreciate the education that you guys are putting out there. And it was great fun to be on the podcast. I really enjoyed Dr. Moat's podcast as well, about his group, Genova Diagnostics piece as well, and how he used the group model to make it more affordable.
That's right.
But we'll have more about that here in the future. Thanks so much for being part of the Functional Forum, Doctor, and we look forward to having you back very soon.
It's my honor. Thanks, James.
Bye. All right. Well, there were definitely some pieces I know that have resonated with your experience, like going on Facebook Live when it probably wasn't an easy or obvious thing. But anything else pop out from that presentation, Dr. McSwain?
Well, I mean, so many things, really. I just, I think people have to understand that the gut is a tube, right? And so if you're going to take anything, food, water, and put it in your mouth, the immune system is going to go after it. It needs to go after it because you've introduced something foreign into the core. And then everything that's going to respond to that with the immune system is a natural reaction to what we've been exposed to. So it's, the body is inherently designed to heal. And if we can activate the immune system to support that healing process, then the other organs will follow suit.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your clinical practice, like I know you mentioned you had a specific program for cancer. Have you developed other specific programs, or what does that look like as patients come in with like a range of issues that may all be connected to, let's say, gut as a central issue?
Well, we have some group programs. So we do something based on Boston Heart that's actually designed to show people the value of labs. So we do want to bring in a community opportunity. And for us, if someone has insurance, including Medicare, they get that in a 2-hour in-depth understanding of lab results, which I think that the panel is about 6 pages for $150. So we really wanted people to understand if there's something going on. So, to Dr. Devers' point, those labs can be very valuable. A lot of times things are hidden underneath the layers of what's going on in their life. So if they can actually see objective data, then they could move that needle forward. I actually call that the husband program, because a lot of functional medicine and integrative medicine, that it's a 50-year-old white lady, who's an executive, whose husband doesn't necessarily jump on board. But if he can see labs and objective data, then the wife is really happy. And it's a way to kind of bring them in and understand how they can resolve problems. I have in general what I call the metabolic person who comes in. A lot of these things have been just ignored, and they've just really, I say, like, a lot of doctors live in this paradigm. A lot of people live in a paradigm. Everybody lives in a paradigm. So in my practice, the paradigm is bigger. I still live in a paradigm, but it includes telling the patient, you're right, this happened. I believe you. And so that they can start understanding that they can be more forthright in these weird things. You always hear patients say, you're never going to believe this. And I'm like, oh, trust me. I promise you, I will believe, I don't go to that. I'm just like, tell me what it is. Like, I'll take it. If it's weird, it's probably one of the answers to why this happened. So we've had some patients who have gotten very sick. One woman went on her honeymoon and never got better since, until we noticed that she had Shigella-like toxins on one of her stool tests. So, she was just constantly affecting her immune system, because that's what happens in the gut, right? If people they have something horrible going on, parasites, a really bad pathogen, their immune system is attacking that, and that fatigues their whole body. And then they might get a little bit stronger, summer in Michigan, for example, and then their immune system starts to attack back to the pathogen, and then they feel fatigued. So they kind of get stuck, that gut issue, where they can't get out of that. They're constantly fighting the gut either way. Either immune system is suppressed or it's actually working and it's fighting, and they feel horrible both ways. And so we really try to explain that to people, that they're kind of stuck in this little situation. So let's get some of the pathogens moved out. And of course we see it in the skin. And but when people come into my practice, yeah, we have like metabolic plus, as sometimes I say, cancer care support. Yeah, just try to get them off the table and get them into a phase where they see me every quarter for maintenance.
So I'd love to, as we move forward into this like reinvention of medicine conversation, and obviously you've done an incredible amount to reinvent yourself into this physician entrepreneur and create these 4 clinics. But I know, you see through the lens of legacy and looking to create something that will stand the test of time for, current Michigan patients and future Michigan patients. And I guess just love to get your thoughts on the reinvention of medicine, this theme that we've chosen for 2021, what it means to you, and what you think is in the vision for the future of the Michigan Center for Holistic Medicine.
So for legacy, I definitely follow the practice of healthy at 100. And I think if we actually start looking at someone and saying, okay, you might be 35 with this problem, but I'm going to look at helping you get and stay healthy at 100. So it's changing the paradigm that it should be an accepted idea of morbidity and early mortality, because I do think people really can get to healthy at 100. And Dr. McGarry has shown us that. She is 100 this year, which is fantastic. And so really seeing that idea that I'm not just going to solve something in the short term. We're not looking at this. We're actually looking at unspiraling what's been going on and then projecting in the future to go into health optimization. And I think that's a second point, is oftentimes we look at dis-ease. And so when my patients get out of dis-ease, they say, well, what do I do now? And I say, whatever you want, let's optimize your health. So that's the idea that they aren't just on a trajectory of just feeling okay so that they maintain some level of morbidity or aging process. It's that they look forward to being vibrant and feeling amazing, and understanding that, yeah, there are going to be falls, there's going to be accidents, they're going to eat spoiled food these things are still going to happen, but they're going to know that the power is within them to say, oh, I know what this is. And they get out of their amygdala and they get out of this primal response of connecting pain or discomfort with fear, and actually just go into a cognitive understanding and have objective ways to solve those problems. And that's the patient of the future.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So the reinvention of medicine is getting people to a point where they can know, where to go from there. It's actually sort of like a level of self-efficacy that I think is what you're talking about there, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
What are some key places during your treatment protocol where you feel like that self-efficacy mindset shift happens? Because I feel like I completely agree with you that is the big shift that needs to happen. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to, as someone who's built 4 clinics and has thousands of patients coming through there, what are some key parts along the way that you found to interject that conversation about self-efficacy? Because I know that's not happening in every functional medicine clinic. Like in some functional medicine clinics, it's just like there's a different guru coming to save you, as opposed to like really, battening down into the empowerment that's necessary for people to, to take on a lot of that themselves.
Mm-hmm. So I would say one of the things is, oftentimes I think we look outside of ourselves to find peace and serenity. And even when people talk about meditation or mindfulness, they're often looking out towards nature, or they're looking at doing a practice on an app. And I'm like, serenity exists in your own physical body. It is at the core of who you are. It is the motion of the cerebral spinal fluid that transmits a wave throughout the body that allows for your body to have an incredible sense of serenity and peace. And so I say, you don't have to look out, go look in. And then I teach them how every organ is part of the pump and the inherent ability of the body to heal, so that they know they have that capacity, that nothing has to exist outside of themselves to make that happen.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's so critical. And I think that any time that we can get into those kind of conversations with people, I think making a big impact. And I know, look, there's a lot more that to say about what that's moving for. I wanted to share, as we're in the conversation of the reinvention of medicine. You know, writing this book on group visits has really created an opportunity, like many new opportunities, to go into places where I think that functional medicine hasn't been. I mentioned last week about the family medicine thing, but this month, you know, the community cure was featured in general surgery news. And, you know, it's very interesting to me, like surgery is kind of almost the opposite of what we're talking about, but it turns out that, you know, there's a lot of people in America that can't have surgery because their health isn't at a level where they can actually participate. Maybe their BMI is over 40, or they have uncontrolled diabetes or otherwise. And so this podcast that I did on this book was talking about how to optimize patients with chronic disease for surgery. And we've actually started fielding inquiries from surgeons and groups thinking about this group visit model. And, you know, could it be the solution to the fact that they can't monetize, you know, a certain number of patients because they can't do surgery on patients that have, you know, these range of conditions. So it's really interesting to see that the role of the functional medicine practitioner is, yes, in reversing chronic disease outcomes in very specific chronically ill patients, but perhaps, you know, this group visit model and applying functional medicine principles in sort of a more of a general way, especially the lifestyle components, the bottom of the matrix, you know, could be a solution to, you know, helping someone on the very other end of medicine, which is obviously, you know, you mentioned earlier, one of your loves, surgery.
Right. I mean, this is a Pandora's box. So yes, we do want to help people if there is a need. But I think all the while, if they start understanding the power exists within them, they might look less to the surgical knife and more towards their own capacity to heal, and keep looking for those answers.
Well, you mentioned, the top of the pyramid earlier, and I think of the naturopathic therapeutic order. And it's actually kind of an interesting theme tonight that I didn't really intend to share, which was, you know, obviously Dr. Devers learning a lot from the naturopathic doctors that worked at Genova, right? And having a mind change. In fact, Dr. Kelly Brogan, who we spoke about right at the beginning, I remember her saying it was her naturopathic doctor that like changed her mindset, being a psychiatrist. You have naturopathic doctors working in your clinic. You know, one of the goals of the early functional forums and the meetups was really to put these kind of practitioners in a room together so they could see the value of each other. It's interesting to just see that cross-pollination of thinking and mindset. And so I want to give a shout out to the naturopathic doctor community that watches the show, because ultimately I feel like, you know, when the functional medicine revolution happens, there's a lot in the naturopathic community to be thankful for bringing us it.
Definitely. And it makes all the difference to include other people's ideas and perspectives into helping people heal and understanding how to be a better clinician.
Beautiful. Well, look, thank you so much for being part here of the Functional Forum. Next week, we will have a whole episode with Dr. McSwain about her journey and some of the practical insights and what it takes to, you know, go from being an employed physician to having 4 clinics and, you know, no sign of stopping yet. So we're very, very excited to continue that conversation. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Functional Forum for any time in the last 7 years. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm very, very excited to think if we could do this in the last 7 years, what the next 7 years has in front of us. And I think we all, and I knew when I got into this, it was going to be, it wasn't going to be a quick journey, you know, to turn a ship of this kind of magnitude, size, and scale around. It does take a lot of people working together. And thank you, Dr. McSwain, for actually going out and doing it so that you can be a bastion for so many other doctors, clinicians, activists, entrepreneurs, and everyone else who's going to come into the space. And I know it's going to make a big impact on the health of Michiganders. That's right. Exactly. Michigan.
Right. Good job.
All right. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here. This has been
Thank you, James.
the Functional Forum. We'll be back next month. We'll be expanding the gut even further out to talk about systemic changes in the healthcare system. We'll have Dr. Tom O'Brien next month. Thanks